Welcome, everybody, to the 50th episode of Sports Avenue. I'm your host, Jimmy Simonis, and today we're going to be talking some rugby. But before we start going into it, I would like to say thank you for everyone for your continuous support and all the love and appreciation. It's going to be a big year in 2020, and I'm excited that you guys can be a part of it. But anyways, we're diving into rugby today with my former coach. Oh, he's a current coach, and he's also a former player who's also a national champion at Notre Dame College. I would like to welcome Liam Monahan. Liam, how you doing?
Good, Jimmy. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you for joining, man. I'm excited.
Yeah, I am as well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. So, Liam, just let's start off. Being in America, rugby's not that popular. How did you end up playing rugby?
So, my dad actually, he played for Ohio University when he went there back in the 80s. And then he played a little bit in Cleveland and also in Orlando when he was living down there. So I always heard of his rugby experiences. And, I've always idoled the man. So I, quickly tried to transition myself into playing the sport that he talked about so much. And so it came to my sophomore year of high school, and a teacher had actually approached me about the sport, as he played as well for St. Ignatius and then Louisville. And it just kind of kicked off from there.
And growing up, did you play any other sports, or was it just that you just stuck with rugby at sophomore year?
So I wrestled all through high school, and in terms of high school, I stuck with wrestling and rugby.
When the rugby club started at our high school, our alma mater, what was it like trying to learn the sport, trying to help these other kids learn the sport and play it?
It was a struggle, to be honest. And, the school didn't really know of the sport yet. And so it was difficult to kind of transition them to think that it might be the next big thing. They had just started a lacrosse team, which was a new and big thing for them. So adding another sport on was kind of, they were hesitant in that they weren't sure, one, the safety of the sport, and two, how it would fit into the spring schedule. So kind of getting that backing took a few months, to, finally convince the higher ups of the school that, it might actually be a good idea. So it took me to get a couple detentions for skipping class and getting kids to sign up. But it was well worth it in the end.
And when the team started, how did practices go? How did you guys learn to play rugby pretty much on the fly before the season started?
So we started in the winter. It was roughly late January, early February, our first year. And we actually, my dad had brought on his friends that he knew had plenty of rugby experience, and it was kind of a chain reaction in bringing other coaches in. Our first year, we had 5 coaches. So one, for a rugby team to have that kind of faculty is kind of unheard of. So we were lucky enough to have people with 20 plus years of experience come and help us out and teach us in a short 2-week frame before we played St. Ignatius, one of their developmental sides, for our first game to kind of get exposure. So the way they kind of framed the practices were, doing the simple stuff. How do you throw a rugby ball? How do you tackle correctly? How do you formulate a game plan based on scenario? So, in the two short weeks that we had a small grasp on what the game was. But, it still took a lot longer for the team to finally kind of come together and understand the sport.
So for you playing rugby, was it easy for you to grasp because your dad played all these years, or was it something you also had to kind of learn it on the go as well?
So that's a great question. It's hard to understand the sport in general. So hearing my dad talk about it, watching it on TV, that was one thing, but actually getting in the game and understanding what you have to do at every moment, it was difficult to kind of grasp that. So for me, even though I had some exposure to the sport, it still took me probably um, in total, 3 years to get a full grasp of what I had to do at every minute of the game. And for most players, that's how it is. I think it was like my sophomore or junior year in college. I was talking with some of the guys I played with, and we were still questioning some stuff. So it is a very hard game to grasp, and you just have to kind of roll with the punches as you go and learning and understanding.
Which is kind of interesting that you say that, because usually when you get to high school, when let's talk like sports like football and baseball, you're supposed to have the basics down. You're supposed to know what to do pretty much at almost any moment. So how is that feeling, especially when you're going into a sport with not a lot of experience?
It's kind of nerve wracking in a way because you don't want to mess up. No athlete ever wants to feel like it was their fault in the game that someone scored, or their fault in the game that resulted in loss. So you kind of had to play it by ear and kind of improvise. You may not know the sport, but if you see a gap in your run, or if you see something that could be an opportunity, then you're just going to kind of wing it and you're going to take it.
And so high school ends, you're off to college. What was the plan in terms of playing rugby?
So I actually was going to go to Lakeland for a semester, kind of save money, get some of my prereqs out of the way. But I was approached by Coach Jason Fox from Notre Dame. I think it was late June, after I graduated high school. So it was kind of eye-opening, like, holy crap, this is happening, So I didn't really get a chance to think about what I was getting into. So that quick 2-month transition resulted in 2 weeks of 3-a-days, and then the season started. So the thinking wasn't really there. The thought process wasn't there. I didn't really have time to grasp what was really happening.
And talk about the 2-a-days in college, especially playing rugby in the heat of the summer.
So, you walk in second week of August. Your first game is, the last weekend in August, or sometimes the first week in September. So what you do is, prior to school starting, is you go through what we called Hell Week, which was essentially 6 a.m. practice, 11 o'clock lift, and a 3 o'clock practice. That would go on for 2 weeks, 7 days a week, just to kind of get us in shape again, get us situated for a game plan, a system, so that we could go into this first game head on and come away with a victory.
And what were those practices like? Because they probably were a lot for you physically and mentally. So how did you overcome the obstacles 7 days a week?
It's tough to get through, and sometimes there's injury, sometimes, there's halts in, the 3-a-days, because say, you went to practice in the morning and, you broke a finger, you pulled something, I don't know. They're obviously going to hold you out in the afternoon. So some of us were kind of hoping we did break a finger just so that we can get a small break. It was very mentally tough to get through that, but we all had an ultimate goal, and that goal was to win nationals right off the bat. We went into the first initial meeting my freshman year, and our coach said, we're going to win nationals this year, so let's get to it. It was that type of mentality, and that's what kind of got you through those 3-a-days. Was you didn't have a choice, right? It is what it is. You had to go through it. And two, with having that opportunity to play the big names like Navy, Army, and stuff like that, and have the opportunity to possibly go to nationals, that's your winning drive. So, in that aspect, it wasn't really hard to get through those 3-a-days.
And for you, what makes Notre Dame a high-profile rugby name when you considering it is a pretty small school in Northeast Ohio? How did they match up against the likes of the navies, the armies?
So, it is tough, and rugby is a weird sport in and of itself. Notre Dame College is a D2 school through NCAA, but rugby's not an NCAA sport. We go through USA Rugby. So the size of your school doesn't really matter. It matters more based on succession. So we had gone to nationals basically throughout NDC rugby history. So inside D2. So what we decided to do was going into my freshman year, we bumped up to D1 AA. And that is decided by the board based on request of your coach. So for that reason, to kind of put it in perspective, we played still small schools. I mean, University of Buffalo is a MAC school, right? Kutztown is a D2 school, but they were a great rugby team, so they were D1 AA. It's all primarily based on recruiting. So we had kids on my team from South Africa, England, Scotland, Ireland, just different places all throughout the world that were able to teach us. One of our coaches my freshman year was from New Zealand, and he had actually played on premier teams as well. So we had great knowledge on our coaching staff and inside and with our players because, kids coming from different countries have been playing it since they were 5 years old. So it was kind of a different climate in that you went in almost knowing more, but knowing less as well, because you had no idea the amount of knowledge these other guys had, but they were willing to teach you. You get to halfway through your freshman year in the season, and you almost feel like you've quadrupled your knowledge of the sport.
And how did these coaches manage recruiting to get pretty much all over the world, like you're saying, some South Africa, New Zealand? I mean, that's crazy.
So with rugby, I shouldn't just say with rugby, with international students that want to go to school in America, they typically hire agents, and those agents will provide applications to different schools that have the sport. They might be an elite school, right? And then from there, there's like a communication base with the coach. The coach doesn't necessarily have to go overseas and meet you, but you can at least talk to them on the phone, learn a bit more about the school, and then talk finances. So lucky for our team had a lot of scholarships, so we were able to pull from different areas like that, even though we were a small school.
So for you, playing with these players from various cultures across the world, how did that help you playing the sport and gaining knowledge?
You're in a game scenario and something goes wrong, right? You get a penalty or the other team scores a try. You go under the try zone as a team and you talk about it. And it was always, the leaders of the team that have a ton of knowledge, and most of them being from different countries, are able to tell you guys, this is what happened and this is how we can assess the situation and get better from it. So, it was kind of, just still going along with the processes and learning from these guys, day by day. It didn't happen in one day. It happened all through my college career.
And for you, what was the biggest moment for you playing at Notre Dame?
I didn't necessarily play in the national championship. I had shoulder surgery 2 months prior, but even just having your team win a national championship was such an honor, and to be in Savannah, Georgia, at Life University, one of the most prestigious rugby schools in the nation, to get that honor was huge, and it was an eye-opening experience, and made you want to work harder towards the ultimate goal, get back on that podium and actually be on that podium.
And you talked about your shoulder surgery. How did that happen? Was that a rugby injury?
I was training for rugby. I was doing 2-a-day lifts over the summer, and just was bench pressing and tore my bicep and my labrum, and went through all of my sophomore fall season with it, but had to get the surgery because I was no longer able to do certain things. over the winter. So that put me out for the entire spring season.
With tearing your labrum, how did you overcome that obstacle? Because that's one of the bigger injuries you can get on your arm.
Yeah, so you just have to, once you get the surgery, you have to play by the book, and it's really hard to do, but going through the physical therapy, sticking to the lifting exercises that the surgeon had told you are now mandatory, not doing barbell anything anymore. There's certain risks you have to take and you have to adjust so that you can maintain the same, same lifting schedule, but also almost take a step back in that, you're not doing certain things. So how can you adjust?
Right. To you, what for you was that pivotal moment that the game clicked for you and things started to get easier?
I would say the game really clicked for me when it was probably my senior year of high school would be the point in which I could say I know the sport, to an extent, and I'm able to play it and know kind of my role. But when I fully understood the sport, I would honestly say when it was when I started coaching, past my playing time and more focusing on what other people are doing and noticing the mistakes that they may be making. That helped me understand more than actually just playing the sport and going through it, minute by minute.
And how did you end up coaching from college to going into coaching?
Well, when I started the team at Lake Catholic, I always knew that I would come back and, help out in any way I could. My dad had approached me about, finally getting on the coaching staff the winter, prior to the season. And, I immediately said yes. Given I wasn't playing anymore, I was missing the sport like crazy. And anything I could do to give back to the sport, I wanted to do.
And when you started coaching, how was it? How was coaching when you first started comparing to when you were playing?
Um, that's kind of a tough question to answer. Coaching is all about leadership, and I've always found myself to be more of a leader. So stepping into that coaching role, I really enjoyed having the control. But in terms of how I could slow the game down, I would say that was the most difficult part of the job. So, actually bringing it back down to the basics and saying, trying not to speak in a more technical term, it was really difficult.
It's kind of off our path, but I do want to ask this question before we go any further. Why do you love rugby?
I mean, we as coaches always say you play the sport once and you get hooked. Any person that comes on and is able to suffer through the practices before that first game, they're hooked, and we see it time and time again. We had one kid this year. He was skeptical about playing because he was a big soccer player, right? And he didn't want to risk his opportunities in soccer by playing rugby. And I remember the look on his face when he made his first hit. He was ecstatic. And from then on, he was a very committed player. Never turned down anything we told him to do. It was always, yes, coach, yes, sir. He just had an innate willingness to learn, and that was a really cool thing to see. And I think that's what happens to everybody. You get into your first game, you make your first hit, you get your first try. You get chills down your spine thinking back to that time. So that's where you fall in love with the sport of rugby. It's simply the memories and the opportunities that come with it.
And why is it so unique in the United States?
We're a football country, football was created off of rugby. So rugby was in the States back in the 1800s and 1700s when, Americans first came over. But it quickly transitioned into another sport, which happens all the time. Soccer was created before rugby, and it was, rugby is a variation of soccer, right? So sports just kind of evolved, but rugby had kind of died after football had started because football became so big. So, to kind of start bringing rugby back into the States, it has been a long journey. Rugby's also had its downfalls and perception. So, um, you know, for us to kind of move past that and show the competitive atmosphere and the opportunities that await you in playing the sport, it's a long process. So I think we're at the point now where we're going to be seeing a breakthrough here soon with the sport, kind of like how we're seeing a breakthrough in lacrosse. Lacrosse actually has its own professional league now that is being aired on NBC and ESPN and all these other stations. So I think we're only a couple steps away from that happening with us. We recently just started the MLR, Major League Rugby, and the overall atmosphere of that is building, along with bringing in players, that played internationally from different countries. Recently, there's just signing with the Beast. He's coming over to the Washington, D.C. team, D.C. United, and he's going to be on their roster, throughout the season. So having a world champion, the World Cup was this year in South Africa won, having him in this country playing the sport of rugby, trying to build a platform for growth is just phenomenal. So I think the way they're, bringing attention to the sport is going great. And not to mention the other form of rugby, sevens, has really taken off, and you're seeing it more on TV. I mean, we're just, like I said, we're moments away from something big. So it's just a moment in time.
And what do you think are the biggest misconceptions about rugby?
Back in the 80s, 70s, stuff like that, it was the drinking sport. It was its own fraternity. So for it to be moving into high schools, parents are just remembering, well, I knew rugby players in college and they were the biggest partiers. Don't get me wrong, the rugby team, we are a fraternity, right? We treat ourselves as brothers, and we do everything together, but we're looking past that. So we want to ensure that we are giving the best perceptions in the way we act on and off the field. Just trying to get rid of those old misconceptions that, we were the partiers, the bad boys, stuff like that.
And how do you do that, especially as a coach, in a high school where you have to try and get these kids to play rugby over the other sports that are available?
Yeah, it's tough. You're going out without pads, right? That's the first big thing, and it's a tackle sport. So there are many elements to why parents don't want their kids to play rugby, and my job as a coach is, to show how safe we're actually being, and make sure that they know we care about our players, and we want the best for them. We wouldn't tell them to play the sport if we didn't want the best for them. So with the opportunities in college and stuff like that, I don't understand why anyone wouldn't want their kid to play rugby. It's safe tackling, it's great culture, and you could go to college, play, and then go play overseas. I mean, you can't do that with a lot of sports. You could go spend a few years in France and play professionally in France or New Zealand or Japan. Players are doing it all the time. So, it's just bringing that awareness to the older generations, that we're looking past the misconceptions that were with the sport previously.
And do you think, like you said, these kids going to college and then going overseas, do you think that will continue throughout the growth of rugby? Or do you think it would become something where the MLR becomes big and everyone flocks over here instead of vice versa?
Don't get me wrong. I think we're always going to be a football country. That's the American culture, right? It's football, baseball, basketball. but I do believe that rugby will become a main sport in schools. It won't just be a club sport. It won't just be, there's a few teams in Northeast Ohio, a few in, Southern Ohio. I think it will be a common sport that you see in every school. So, that's what we want. We want the exposure to be all throughout the US and not just in certain segments.
So how has USA Rugby gotten kids to start playing rugby more? What have they done to try and push into the
Word of
public?
mouth mostly. I mean, you think back to when you were in high school. For those of you that don't know, Jimmy was a player of mine in my first year of coaching. Um, and he comes from a line of football, correct?
Yes, sir.
So, but Jimmy's dad had always been a great advocate for us in that he loved the sport of rugby and was trying to get Jimmy to play. Jimmy finally came out his senior year and he loved it, to my understanding.
I did.
So
I did. I had a blast.
right. So it's all word of mouth. You know, we could only do so much advertising through USA Rugby to get kids to play, but until it's in the schools, they really don't have that option. So getting it on TV more on the main channel, and then also just giving exposure through tournaments and getting it into schools is the only thing that's really going to help.
And you were talking about, I know we were talking about safety earlier, but with how football has been approached with CTE and all these other concussion problems, how do you think rugby can benefit? Because I personally think that rugby can benefit tremendously if with the NFL struggling to protect its players.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to defer, CTE to certain sports. And the reason I say that is you can get a concussion just by simply walking on some ice, right?
Right.
So um, I always tell parents going in that anything can happen, but we ensure the best safety for our players. So, I think CTE is a big problem all throughout the world, in all sports, right? Um, but, we're trying to make it better. So that's why we perform proper tackling methods. We keep our kids out of dangerous play. The refs are aware of what dangerous play looks like. So if they have to, they'll break it up prior to, something bad happening. We just take every precaution we can. And I know football, soccer, basketball, wrestling, they're all doing the same.
And for you, what is a goal? What's your main goal as a coach? Do you have an end goal in doing this, or is it just to help keep rugby alive in school?
Yeah, I mean, every coach has a goal, right? My goal every year is, I want to take our team to states. That's the main goal. Overall, ideally, I'd like to get kids, to go to different tournaments. I would like to kind of give more opportunities so that they can see the country and different teams, nationally ranked high school teams that have, been performing for years, right? Just give it more exposure, at least for my players, because that'll be great for recruiting as well.
And do you have a goal of coaching in college or pros?
If the opportunity, comes, I'll think about the offer, but I see myself more at Lake Catholic than anywhere else as of right now.
And when your dad offered you to come back, what was that feeling like being able to coach where you played at?
It was a cool feeling, it's kind of that full circle, perception. So I started the team, I played for the team, and now I'm coaching the team. So it was good to be back, and it was really cool to see how how we may have looked week one, but we didn't realize it, and now I'm able to evaluate and kind of set a practice plan so that we can get better. It's cool being on that side of it rather than going into every week and you're just trying to learn. You just want to learn. So both sides of it were an experience.
And talking about the Lake Catholics rugby team this year, How do you feel about how do you feel about it going into it?
I feel good. We actually have our first winter practice this Sunday, so it'll be good to see how many kids we get out there. I think, to add on to my goals for this year, I would also love to be able to field two sides. So, a roster in rugby is 23 players. I would love to have the availability to have a roster of 23 and a roster of 15, and then, supplement the A and B side so that we can have two games.
And how have you gone about trying to get kids to play? Like, is there a way besides just getting the students to play, or have you done any direct contact to the parents to say, hey, give it a shot, you won't regret it?
We show our faces at open houses. We keep announcements going in the school through the faculty. And it's also just about creating relationships with the other coaches, giving them the added value in playing rugby along with the sports that they coach. So, for football, we've seen tremendous improvement in our football players that have come and played rugby out on the football field and on the rugby field, just from playing both sports. With wrestling, the aggressiveness in wrestling versus the aggressiveness in rugby, they're kind of one and the same. So when we bring wrestlers on, there's that added value that we know they're going to tackle correctly. There's that added value we know they're going to go with some tenacity. So, creating that a perception of added value to the other coaches is a huge benefit, not only for us but for them as well.
And for rugby in general, where do you see it going in the future?
In terms of the United States?
Just in general, to be honest.
It's an old-fashioned sport, right? And it hasn't changed much since the beginning, other than the safety factors that we've had to account for, right? And so we created some rules. I do believe that it'll continue to get safer as time goes on. Society wants safer, so we want to adapt with society. In terms of what the future holds, I don't know, but I do know that we will continue to try and grow this.
And how do you feel that a sport can get safer, although it's a contact sport?
It comes with rules and regulations. You look at rugby back in even the 90s, right? Early 2000s. There was no crouch bind set. The ref wasn't saying that. You were just going from straight up to down in the scrum, and it was, people were getting knocked in the heads all the time. So that's a recent rule that was put in, and stuff like that will continue to happen. You know what I'm saying? So I can't tell you what changes are going to be made, but I can tell you that we're going to continue to adapt as we see faults in the system.
Liam, I want to say thank you for joining the podcast, and if you want to give out any information on how they can contact you or get involved with rugby.
Yeah, for the people that are listening to this that may be interested in playing the sport, or have kids that may be interested in playing the sport, feel free to contact me. I guess follow me on Twitter, Liam_Monahan97, and DM me with any questions you may have. I'm happy to help you.
Liam, I just want to say thank you for joining the podcast. I'll definitely bring you back to talk more rugby, but thank you again. I truly appreciate you taking the time to talk about the sport.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me, Jimmy, and I hope all is well, and it seems like you're doing great, so just keep it up.
Yeah, yes, sir, I will. Thank you, Liam. Guys, everybody that's listening, thank you for listening to Sports Avenue. Thank you for the continuous support. Everyone, have a great day, have a great week, and don't forget the Road for Sports starts here on Sports Avenue. Talk to you soon.